Nice to see you, Peter. I like
We are on air.
All right, great, thanks. I call the 2,333rd meeting of the Milwaukee City Council to order. This meeting has been conducted by video conference. The public has been invited to watch the meeting on the city's YouTube channel, Comcast channel 30 in city limits, or by logging into the Zoom video conference as an attendee. The public may submit comments in writing by email to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov. There will be opportunities for the public to give oral testimony during today's meeting. When it is time to take public comment, staff will monitor the email inbox, the Zoom participant list, and the Zoom chat to see if anyone would like to speak. We will take comments in the order they are seen and received. Spanish translation services are available upon request. The public is asked to request translation and other meeting accessibility services at least 48 hours before the meeting. Contamos con servicio de traducción en español cuando sea solicitado. Se pide al público que solicite servicios de traducción y otros servicios de accesibilidad para reuniones por lo menos 48 horas antes de la reunión. Translation services are also available in other languages. The public is asked to request translation and other meeting accessibility services at least 48 hours before the meeting. If members of the public become disruptive, we will mute and remove them from the video conference. If that fails to stop the disruptions, we will recess the meeting and return within 5 minutes. If we are unable to continue, council will briefly meet off air to move unfinished business to the next council agenda. All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The city of Milwaukee respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kayapuyya Etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. There are 2 days, so the announcements. There are 2 days left to participate in the second virtual open house for phase 1 of the implementation. Actually, I think that got extended another week, right?
Till the 15th.
Okay. So however many days that is. There are 9 days left to participate in the second virtual open house for phase 1 of the implementation of the comprehensive plan. This phase of the project focuses on housing, trees, and residential parking. Visit Engage Milwaukie at engage.milwaukee.gov to participate. Engage for Earth Day throughout the month of April. Opportunities include a reading challenge, a drawing for free books, and opportunities to share how you celebrate Earth Day. To learn more and participate, visit Engage Milwaukie. The North Clackamas Watersheds Council invites you to participate in an online event to explore the connections between humans and watershed health called Watersheds People and Place. Join them on April 13th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Join a poetry reading by Arab American poet, essayist, educator, and performer Claudia Savage. The event will be live streamed on the Leading Library, the YouTube channel on Wednesday, April 14th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Milwaukee celebrates Earth Day on Saturday, April 24th. The virtual event will feature presentations, interactive discussions, and a variety of calls to action. To register, send an email to rsvp@milwaukeeoregon.gov or call 503-786-7519. For more information about each of these events and others, please visit the city's homepage where you will find the city calendar at milwaukeeoregon.gov. If you don't have access to the internet, please call the city's general number at 503-786-7555, and staff will provide you with the information you need or connect you with someone who can help. Our next item is proclamations and awards, and we have the Oregon Tree City of the Year Award. This will be presented by Community Assistance Forester Katie Lumpa with the Oregon Department of Forestry. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and City Council, happy Oregon Arbor Month. This is the first year that we actually celebrate our Oregon Arbor Month. We used to have it just for a week. I'm pleased to be here tonight. My name is Katie Lampa, as mentioned, and I'm the Community Assistance Forester for the Oregon Department of Forestry's Urban and Community Forestry Program. In celebration of Oregon's urban and community forests, the forests where we live, the 2021 Oregon Urban and Community Forestry Awards are being presented to inspirational individuals and organizations for promoting tree planting and care, engaging citizens, raising awareness about urban trees and forests, and protecting Oregon's forests. For over 20 years, Oregon Community Trees and the Oregon Department of Forestry have recognized individuals and organizations who do the often unsung work of improving our communities through their community forestry efforts. Oregonians eager to recognize the important contributions of their neighbors and colleagues to urban trees and forests can submit nominations for an Oregon Urban and Community Forestry Award at the beginning of each calendar year. The recipient of the Oregon Tree City of the Year Award must be, well, a Tree City USA. Each year, the staff of the Oregon Department of Forestry's Urban and Community Forestry Assistance Program elects a worthy candidate that then must be approved by the directors from Oregon Community Trees. On behalf of Oregon Community Trees and the Oregon Department of Forestry, I'm honored to present the 2021 Oregon Tree City of the Year Award for outstanding leadership in promoting urban and community forestry to the city of Milwaukie. The city receives this award because in the 5 years that it has been recognized nationally as a Tree City USA, it has demonstrated continued focus on growing its urban forestry program. Let me tell you about some of your city's activities, which a lot of you will know real well. The city has received 2 Tree City USA Growth Awards in the 5 years that it's been a Tree City USA. The Growth Award is presented by the Arbor Day Foundation to participating Tree City USA communities that demonstrate higher levels of tree care and community engagement during a calendar year. The City of Milwaukee's 2020 Growth Award activities included the creation of a new tree fund and a seasonal position, which provided hands-on training for the new employee, caring for the urban forestry program's nursery stock. The city's urban forest management plan defines several goals, policies, and actions that maximize the benefits of Milwaukee's trees and meets Milwaukee's climate goals outlined in its climate action plan. The Public Works Department's urban forestry program has a dedicated natural resource team led by Peter Passarelli, Milwaukee's Public Works Director. The team includes an International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist, and this person provides technical expertise and guidance. This position has been filled for over 6 years by Julian Lawrence. The city's urban forest program team closely collaborates with the Milwaukie Tree Board, a community-led advisory committee created in 2017 to assist the City Council on tree-related policies. The board maintains the city's plan for trees and shrubs in public places. The comprehensive, easy-to-find urban forestry website provides the community with resources and educational materials on trees and connects interested volunteers with local organizations who are improving habitat and ecosystem in Milwaukie. Your very own Natalie Rogers, Milwaukee's Climate Action and Sustainability Coordinator, puts it this way. The city of Milwaukee is a small urban community implementing big climate and urban forest actions. Thanks to dedicated staff in the Public Works Department leading Milwaukee's urban forestry program. And we couldn't agree more with Natalie. So, even though I do not have the plaque in hand, but Peter does, on behalf of Oregon Community Trees and the Oregon Department of Forestry, I'm pleased to present the 2021 Oregon Tree City of the Year Award to the City of Milwaukie. We thank the City Council, staff, and volunteers for all your work, and especially for your dedication to urban and community forestry in Milwaukee and the state of Oregon. Milwaukeeans have something to celebrate this Arbor Month and every day. Congratulations. And thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Well done, team. That's a very cool award. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mayor Gamba. If I could just say a couple words, it's really been a team effort on our urban forest program. We couldn't have done this without the support of the council and the support of our city manager, Ann Ober, as well as our tree board, Kathleen Brennan Hunter, our tree board chair, Gina Dake, John Brown, Lee Garnett, Madison Tucker, Christina Harris, and Alexis Martin. They've been fantastic volunteer members of the community and have been really helpful. And as well as Julian and Natalie, they've really been helpful and helped move the program forward. And I also want to call out the support of our engineering department and community development department. Both Steve and Layla have been very supportive of our urban forest program and our climate goals as well. So it's really been a team effort.
It's great. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for all the work and the effort you've put into this. Yep.
Where's that plaque going to go, Peter?
We'll bring it over to City Hall and put it up somewhere up in City Hall.
Great. Very cool.
I think there's interest in getting a photo op whenever between you and Peter. You can arrange that and make sure you send it along to Katie. And I know Jordan wanted a copy of that.
Okay. Yeah. Happy to do that.
Well deserved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
That was cool. Stop. All right. Our next item is city manager and COVID transition updates.
Thank you, Mayor. So the reason that we wanted to talk about this for a few minutes tonight is that vaccines are here and we're starting to see increasing numbers who are getting vaccinated. The city announced on the front page of the pilot what our schedule would be for opening doors to the public in this month's pilot. But we wanted to have a quick conversation with you about when you all feel like you'd like to come back to City Hall and to start meeting in person again. So right now, our plan is that the general public would have access to the vaccines for at least 8 weeks on mid-June point. So our staff would be coming back at higher numbers starting on June 21st. I will note that as I'm having this conversation today, the city or the county actually was put into a higher safety level. So it went from being at moderate to high. So the pandemic is not over, just for anybody who is watching tonight. And so I just wanted to start a conversation about how we can best support council as you're returning to the spaces and at what point you feel like the general population has had access to the vaccines and you feel like you all would be comfortable or safe being in a public meeting space. So I'm literally just opening the door up for you all to make this decision. This one's yours. Yes, Scott?
And I might just add too, we all have various memories of how last June went with hybrid meetings. And we're working with our partners at Willamette Falls Media and with IT to figure out better solutions. So when a timeline for your return to in-person meetings is identified, we hope to have a better solution in place, because we're also of the opinion that you cannot deny the access that Zoom and online meetings gives to certain people who are otherwise unable to come. And we want to continue to be as accessible as possible. And so we're working on solutions. I don't have a silver bullet answer. We are seeing what our colleagues in government, the county, board of commissioners and other cities, what they're doing. So we're working on it. And I would hope whatever timeline you were to set, I would hope to have a much better solution than what we had last June. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Nothing, I don't have a plan yet, but we're working on it.
That's my main concern. And so I don't want to, even though we all might be vaccinated and some portion might be, there might still be, and beyond that, beyond the pandemic, I think, this has really shown us that, more folks can engage, when we have this ability. And so I guess my preference would be to make sure, I guess maybe work a little bit more closely, find out what that solution might be, and maybe try to time it a little bit more with what the actual technology, what we can do technologically, because I don't want to come back before we have a good solution in place. I don't think that is, I think that maybe potentially delays progress on getting to that point.
I think that part of this complication last year was that we weren't all in one place either. And so trying to make the sound work both ways and other things, I think that was probably more complicated than this should be. I would hope. Anyway, I'm personally eager to get back to personal meetings. And I would think, if mid-June is when, is 8 weeks after the widespread availability of the vaccines. And I think July, we often don't have a first meeting in July because of a July 4th or whatever, or we have a truncated first meeting, but I'd be ready to go back in July.
And it came up during interviews for library, at least, and I've been thinking a lot about it. Maybe for council, we all, we signed up for in-person meetings. I think that we need to be considering, in-person meetings as an obstacle to participation. And so, whether it's, one of us has to do a meeting via Zoom, or it's one of our boards, that in order for them to meet a quorum, or even just to expand access to, to participation, I think that we need to be thinking about a hybrid world, generally, just to make sure, even for board members. I'm not just saying for people who want to come and give testimony or listen in. I think that we need to be considering that this is something that actually will enable more people to participate on a board or commission.
I agree actually with both Lisa and Angel. I do think this last year has taught us that there's some opportunities within this sort of virtual world. It also has its limitations. And I think we've always had counselors who maybe were traveling and called in or something. This just gives us a slightly better version where they're on Zoom. So clearly it's technologically feasible to do this. It's just, it'll take some doing. And so kind of back to Angel's questions, Scott, do you think in 2 months you guys can pull together the technology to make it functional?
Sure. I mean, like I said, I don't have the solution totally mapped out, but I have meetings set up and I've been talking to folks, and It may involve the acquisition of new technology a little bit, but nothing that's not, like you said, Mr. Mayor, the technology does exist and we've seen it. And we're working on it. I think a 2-month timeline is reasonable at this point. We're still figuring out what that solution is. But yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have not forgotten how terrible the one hybrid meeting we did was either. I know none of us has. And it is also true, as the mayor pointed out, that we have had people call in. I've been one of those people before on council. So I hesitate a little at the assertion that Zoom is better than calling in, because it really wasn't for that hybrid meeting. So I guess I want to give Scott the flexibility to figure out whatever works best for having someone who's on a board or on council who needs to call in to be able to participate fully. But then when it comes to people who are not on boards, but are the general public, I think we are saying that we want there to be as much access as possible, and that likely includes Zoom. Is that fair to state?
Zoom or some technology similar. I mean, there may be something out there that actually works.
Yeah,
for that
yeah.
type of scenario.
I mean it like Kleenex, like the generic name of the video conference. And I'll also say that I talked to a constituent today who cannot easily access via Zoom because they only have a telephone. They have absolutely no internet access. So I think as much as this is a tool, being back to in-person really will also help people with access in the more old-fashioned way. So yeah. It's just complicated.
Yeah,
I would say it's really complicated as somebody who's back in person teaching and teaching online. It gets really complicated trying to navigate the two platforms. And so I would just caution that we take our time and do it right. Although Zoom has broken down barriers for some folks, but it is by far not easy to navigate these two things.
Yeah.
Can we schedule a test if we are going to do some sort of hybrid that is not an actual meeting? Because I don't want us to put the public through trying to figure this stuff out. Okay, great.
100%. Whatever we do, we'll test and test away.
Great. Sign me up.
Cool.
So as we're talking about doing the testing and going through all these iterations, just coming back to when, knowing that the technology piece is still probably a bit out. How do you want to handle that?
What is the first meeting in July?
We usually skip the 4th of July meeting. So it's usually the study session.
Okay. Well, that seems like a fair one to aim for. And, if the technology doesn't come together, it doesn't come together, but let's make that our target.
So that'd be July 13th. It looks like.
And I do believe it is easier for us to do a hybrid approach if we have all of you together and the staffing together. So that is my intention, is that we will try and make it work for a constituent involvement, but that we're not trying to actually run the meeting with people in separate places. If that's not the case, please let me know.
The leading solution, I can tell you at this moment, and we have lots to do, but is kind of where you have your body, your board in a space, and then it kind of projects back. And you can have an in-person audience, but then you're also kind of setting yourself up where the body is being seen in one angle, one camera shot, and it gets kind of put through with, you're basically 5 people in one Zoom window, and that's projected into Zoom. That's kind of where we're going. So to Ann's point, having the council together,
Yeah, and I guess again, I just want to say I don't want that, because if that's going to be our goal, I guess I don't, and that's going to work. I mean, we know that's going to work, right? But I'm still saying I really think that we need to come up with, and I was hoping that maybe we would come up with a solution that provides, board, committee, commission members the opportunity to also participate in a hybrid model. So I'm worried that we're saying we're going to give ourselves 2 months to come up with a hybrid model so that, people who want to listen can join via some other solution. But, we're not necessarily going to make progress on the board itself being in a hybrid model in the next 2 months.
Just to clarify, my goal is not to have them just listen. It would actually to have constituents fully engage. The issue is trying to have the engagement across. One of the things we noticed is that when everybody else is in a room and somebody else is on the video, it starts getting disjointed because you all talk in the space and then you have somebody who's not fully as engaged because the person leading the meeting or because of other constraints within the room, it doesn't work as well. We are looking at technology for several of our rooms to try and figure out how we might be able to reach what you're talking about, Counselor, where we would have more active engagement from individuals who actually are on the boards. We just don't have that technology today, and I doubt we'll have it by July. When Scott and I were talking, we were thinking we might be able to get it by August or September. And so that's my bigger hesitancy is I don't think that by the July study session, we're going to be able to have you all in a different space, but we are still committed to trying figuring this out. And I know school districts will be trying to figure this out as well, Counselor, because it is still really disjointed and the technology just isn't working as well as I think everybody hoped it would be. But now people are coming back to work to an extent, and I'm hoping that'll start to transition companies like Zoom and others who really need to come up with platforms that allow for more of that hybrid model.
Our goal, Councillor Falconer, to your point, our goal is not passive one-way communication. It's that both sides, wherever they are in person or on Zoom, can hear each other. And we also have, keeping in mind, not just for the city council, but for all of our boards and commissions and the committees of the city, that they could use the same thing for their meetings because they have had various experiences and preferences for being on Zoom or being in person. And it's something we don't want just to be at council and want to be as interactive and replicable as possible. So absolutely, that's our goal.
Cool. Anything more on this one? Okay, great. Thank you. Community comments. This is the part of the agenda during which council will hear community members' statements regarding city business. Those wishing to speak, please raise your hand or indicate that you wish to speak. Before you make your comments, please state your name and city of residence for the record. If you would like the city to follow up with you, please submit your contact information to ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. As council has other business items on the agenda this evening, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Because information provided during community comments may be new, the city manager will respond at the next council meeting to those comments that require follow-up. Before we begin, is there any follow-up from the March 16th community comments, Ms. Ogar?
There is not. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Scott, anybody?
I see no emails, Mr. Mayor, and I see no hands raised, or let me check the chat, which is empty. So I see none, Mr. Mayor.
All right. If something comes up while I'm reading the consent agenda, we can address it then. Tonight's consent agenda includes the minutes of the city council on March 2nd, a work session, March 2nd, a regular session, and March 9th, a study session. A resolution reappointing Brett Laurelia, I always trip over his name, to the Design and Landmarks Committee. A resolution appointing Jason Tanamore and Christina Thomas to the Library Board, and an Oregon Liquor Control Commission application for Pick Little Store located at 2936 Southeast Washington Street for off-premise sales. Does any member of council wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard or seen. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. Sparrow site goals adoption as a resolution. Community Development Director Leila Aman and our Development Project Manager Allison Wicks will present.
Great, thank you. I will start off by sharing my screen. Okay. Good evening, Mayor Gamba, councilors. My name is Allison Wicks. I'm the Development Project Manager for the City of Milwaukee. I also have Leila Aman here. Leila, I don't know if you want to jump on and introduce yourself.
Leila Aman, Community Development Director. Hi, everyone.
And tonight I'll share another update on the Sparrow site project. I'll ask for council to hear feedback from the community and review goals for the project. We were last in front of you on March 16th when we talked about project goals, the site access study, and community engagement. So as a reminder, the Sparrow Street property is a triangle-shaped property in the Island Station neighborhood. It's in close proximity to downtown Milwaukee and the Max Orange Line station at Park Avenue. The City of Milwaukee purchased the site in 2019 for the purpose of bringing affordable housing to the city, and it's about a 2-acre site with 1 acre of developable land. This is an overview of our project timeline. We've started the property disposition, site design, and community engagement phases of the project. So in January and March, council reviewed the project goals. And tonight we're here to have council review those goals again and consider a resolution. Our next steps in the disposition process are a public hearing, declaring the property surplus, and authorizing a request for qualifications. Just a reminder that we're planning to have that RFQ align with the updated housing code from the comprehensive plan implementation process. From Vera's presentation earlier, it looks like there'll be draft language on time for summer 2021. The site access study, which is a part of our site design process, is underway. So we talked about the HHPR contract last time. So staff or myself, Leila and Steve Adams will be reviewing the results of the survey this month. And then for community engagement on March 17th, I presented at the Island Station NDA meeting. And as a part of this presentation, I have feedback and questions from that meeting. And just a reminder that the Island Station meeting, isn't all of the community engagement we'll be doing for this project, so that there'll be more to come in the fall. So questions from the Island Station NDA. A Q&A sheet was provided to the Island Station NDA and was also included in your council packet. There's sort of 3 categories of questions and concerns. Those categories are transportation improvements and impacts, questions about affordable housing, and a 3rd area of concern was about the timing for setting goals while there's these outstanding questions about, what the new zoning code is going to be and what the results of our access study will be. So transportation improvement questions included how will the Sparrow site development impact traffic on Southeast 26th and in the neighborhood in general, and why is the city considering a pedestrian path on Sparrow? So kind of briefly, our responses to those were around that the city will start taking traffic counts on Southeast 26th and in the general area to get a better understanding of the existing conditions, and that a traffic impact study will be required as a part of the development's land use application.
The city's considering pedestrian improvements on Sparrow Street because that's part of the projects included in our 2021-2026 CIP. And then in general, there was concern from some neighbors about the idea of closing this section of Sparrow between 25th and 26th to vehicle traffic.
Can I just add, I mean, you mentioned that the Sparrow Street path is in the CIP, but I think more importantly, it's been on the transportation system plan since, I believe, 2007. So it has been, it's not had funding, but it has been a proposed project since 2007. There's nothing sort of new about that has, you know, that was planned independent of this property coming into the city.
Great, yeah, that's really good context. It's a great connection, you know, from the trolley trail all the way to Spring Park. Affordable questions related to affordable housing included, you know, the ones listed on this slide. So one of those questions was what other uses were considered for this property. And I shared that the property zoned residential, so no other uses were considered. And the property was purchased from TriMet for the purpose of land banking for affordable housing. To answer some of these other questions, I shared information about kind of what is considered affordable housing, you know, from kind of the federal guidelines, and then the Milwaukie Housing Emergency Ordinance and the Milwaukie Housing Affordability Strategy. I was also asked if this is a good location for affordable housing. And so I shared information about the criteria that the Housing Authority of Clackamas County recently used to judge affordable housing sites as a part of their NOFA process. And so in addition, there was also general concerns from community members about providing 0 to 30% area median income units without providing on-site services. So in addition to speaking with the Island Station NDA over the past couple of weeks, I've also spoken with a handful of affordable housing developers to ask for their feedback and kind of ground truth the Sparrow goals that we've set. So I've met with Catholic Charities, Northwest Housing Alternatives, Proud Ground, Habitat for Humanity, Community Development Partners, and some others. And I wanted to share kind of this set of feedback that I've heard to date, which really focuses on our first two goals. So our goal around affordable housing and around unit size. So this, you know, kind of group of affordable housing developers, some are focus more on rental development and some on home ownership development. So for the folks that work on income restricted rental units, this is some of the kind of general feedback that I've heard, that it's challenging to finance 0 to 30 area median income projects that are smaller than 50 units. And it's hard to compete for low income housing tax credit financing with larger projects. Kind of the sweet spot is 150 to 180 unit projects, or at least 50 units or larger for those low income housing tax credits. 0 to 30% units, what I've heard is that it's best to have on-site resident services, and that 45 units is kind of the low end to have on-site residential services. There are some examples of projects that'll have like a nearby office or other facility that kind of provides that kind of remote services if they're not able to provide it on-site. And that 0 to 30% units have less long-term operating income. That a lot of these groups, their preference was to have both 60% units and 30% units, because even those 60% units have a little bit more income and they're able, over the 30-year affordability period, you'll have some income to provide maintenance for the projects. And then also that the smaller unit sizes, so studios and 1-bedrooms, help the lowest income people. And then some information about income restricted home ownership units. Is that home ownership for under 30% AMI is just not a common product. Kind of an example is that for a 25-unit Habitat for Humanity project, they would have 15 units for 60% or below AMI, so could reach some folks at that lowest end of the income spectrum. And then 7 or 8 units at 60 to 80% MFI. And that home ownership developers would often recruit from income restricted housing buildings. So then it kind of frees up a unit in the affordability ecosystem. So if someone's moving into an home ownership unit, they're leaving another income restricted unit available for another family. So with that information in mind, I wanted to share our goals as they're currently stated, which this first one is a little dated just in how it refers to the upcoming zoning change from the comp plan. So that's something we could clarify. So the first goal is preference for income restricted rental units or affordable home ownership opportunities. Under the current R5 zoning, preferences for a project that reserves 100% of units for residents earning 0 to 30% area median income is preferred. If there's a zoning change to allow additional units, preferences for a project that reserves the majority of units for residents earning 0 to 30% of AMI, or some for those earning up to 60% of area median income. And then unit size is a preference for 2 and 3-bedroom units. So with kind of all of that information, my question for council is, do you want to edit the affordable housing goal to be more flexible? So with that, I'll pause, kind of take any questions. And we've also drafted an edited goal, so if that's easier to respond to, we can start there as well.
I have a question first. I assume you've been following the comp plan process. Given that it's residential and whether it ends up being in the sort of single family, single unit, whatever we're calling that, residential or multifamily residential, what are the 2 unit numbers that property could support?
I could answer that question. So I don't know yet. It's in the R5, so it'll be part of likely if we, whatever path we end up taking for consolidation of the zones, it'll be in that larger zone. So it's not part of the current mixed use or high density zone. So I anticipate it'll get wrapped into that. And it's a site, it's an acre. So part of the code process that we just haven't gotten to yet is understanding kind of what the capacity of that largest site is. We know it should be able to allow all the middle housing types, but to how much, that's still to be determined.
And if it was rezoned the same as across Milwaukie?
In like the DMU, is that what you're referring to?
No, whatever there's an entire apartment complex directly across Milwaukie from that piece of property.
Yeah, it's currently part of the R5, so it'll get packaged in with whatever the R5 zone gets packaged in with ultimately.
So there's 2 processes that are possible. One is, as we are drawing the maps, we could change that. Secondly, let's say, reach partners with us, and they ask for a zoning change for that property. If it were then zoned in the new high density zone, how many units could it have?
Yeah, they would have to go through that process to get it rezoned. And I don't know how many units it would have. We can look at that and see if we can take the existing high density zone and apply that to this site as a start. But we won't know until the code itself is adopted. But yeah, that is two paths. You either go with what's allowed by right, or there's a path where they can pursue a zone change. But that would also, I think, require a comprehensive plan amendment as well. So we can look to those options, but.
Okay.
So I will say that I appreciate this extra research that Allison did, and I was concerned that, you know, that the focus on 30% below 30% of AMI and below was, you know, sort of necessarily going to mean not ownership potential. So I do like the idea of exploring ownership potential. So, I mean, I guess that's just my feeling is I'd like to see some more flexibility so that that is a potential in the mix.
That's in the current wording.
Yeah, I think I seem to recall numbers that included, you know, that Habitat's numbers include as low as maybe 40% AMI, you know, families earning 40% AMI. It wasn't like 60 was the floor.
Yeah, it's 60 is the ceiling. So it's 60 and could go all the way down to 0, but it's, you know, so it's not, I think they're common for them for a project would be kind of that 30 to 80%.
Mr. Mayor, I don't see where you're seeing ownership referenced in the draft goals.
Affordable housing, preference for income restricted rental units or affordable home ownership opportunities. First line.
Okay.
Well, I guess I have a kind of a counter question for you, Allison and Layla, of if it is put out there as currently worded, is it likely that we are going to receive any RFQ bids, really? Because what I'm hearing is that this is sounding pretty restrictive to the folks who are in the business. And I personally would like to have us have at least a couple of options to consider as we're exploring what to do with this site. So I'm interested to know if it seems like we're going to get a couple of options if we put it out there as it is currently worded.
What I'm hearing is that the home ownership folks would see this preference for 0 to 30 and kind of be like, ooh, I'm not a great fit. And then anyone who wants to do a larger project looks at the zoning and is like, oh, I don't know if I can do 50 units on this site. And so I think that's, if we have something that's more flexible, we could get both of those proposals potentially.
Did you say you had a draft?
Yeah.
Would that be helpful to others? It might be helpful for me.
Sure.
So keeping that income restricted rental units for income restricted rental units or affordable home ownership opportunities that serve households earning 80% or less AMI, preference for a project that serves lower income households.
That was great.
That's usually my house. I would just echo what Allison said. I do think that having some flexibility will widen the scope. In terms of like the unit count, this site is challenging for a number of reasons. And I think we just need to keep that front of mind, that potentially encouraging an increase in density in order to get a certain type of project may not be an ideal approach, just because I think of some of the complexities in terms of accessing the site's location and adjacency to other residential areas. So I just wanted to throw just a few ideas out there in terms of why rezoning may not be ideal to get what we want, but in changing the goal to be more flexible may get us closer to what we want with what we have.
Would it help if we had a preference for some percentage serving? I mean, I guess I do not want to abandon, if we put this the way it is now, I just don't think that we're going to solicit the very low income that we're hoping to serve. I mean, and the goal, the original goal was, to serve the majority being 0 to 30. Does it help if we include, or replace majority with some percentage?
So I want to problematize this a little, because I don't know that our conversations have been about very low income. They've been varied, and I don't know that we've been clear in our direction to staff about this. I think overall the intent is to serve very low income to some degree, but we've also talked about people with school-age children who are currently experiencing houselessness as being the real target population. I have yet to see the line drawn between 0 to 30% AMI is the exact same population as those families with school-age children currently experiencing houselessness, because I think that there are families that are making a significantly more amount of money, that are 30 to 60, perhaps even 60 to 80, I don't know, who do experience houselessness or are, having the kids stay with family friends and they're sleeping in the car, doing that semi-housed thing. So I would like more information about who exactly is this population and what their needs really are, before we keep going down the path of assuming that they are 0 to 30 AMI.
Yeah, I'm not assuming they are. I'm saying that our draft goal has always discussed and prioritized 0 to 30.
Yeah, okay, I hear you.
I think that's a totally reasonable question to get answered. I also, given all this new information, would like an answer to my question about numbers of units, because, if the intent is to actually get something built, and if the people who are most likely to build it are only going to build within certain parameters, we need to know that we can hit those parameters.
And I'm also, I'm still feeling like we don't really know enough about the access issues to have a full picture of how to answer that question either. I'm concerned that we may end up with limitations on the number of units that are realistic for down there, just based on how you can get what needs to get down there. So I don't know if we can do this right now, honestly. I don't know if we're ready to finalize this.
No, I don't think we are either.
I'm just going to say that's okay. I think that this is progress. Like, we want to keep things moving. But Allison and I had a conversation before this meeting, and we anticipated that you might land here. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. And the additional follow-up questions, these are important questions. As we start to dive into the site more, we learn more, we start talking to more people start paying attention. It's important for us to get that, because what we're trying to do is set this RFQ up for success. So staff can go back and get the information on the housing side of it, and we can look into what we can pull in terms of understanding the houselessness experienced by families with children. So we can look at those, try to pull as much data as we can related to that. But those are good pieces.
The director at Wichita would be an outstanding resource for that kind of information.
Great.
And just to, you're all going to hate me for doing this. I do hear that in what you're getting from the folks who are really in the development business, that having a diversity of unit sizes is not the worst thing in the world. There's some really cool stuff that is done, not very frequently, but there's really cool stuff done around multi-generational housing, and not just getting families that are multi-generational all living near one another, but older folks who are of limited means, who need support, who would love to be part of a family that is raising children by proxy, you know, by being neighbors to them. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that we have a lot of folks who are aging in Milwaukie and don't have a lot of money and might really be well served by a project that might consider them as residents as well. So, and I know that's not something we've talked about at all to date, but you know, looking at what we have heard from developers, maybe there's some really cool thing that's out there that we haven't been really considering as we've been focused on having 2 and 3 bedroom units that would still be of service to families and serve this older population that is really going to need some help.
Well, you can think about Bridge Meadows. They're one. They do exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
So the home ownership opportunity is there for, you know, the elders, and, you know, the serving 0 to 30, you know, income level could be the, you know, the high school student who would. So I agree with you. I think that there are potentially other models there where, you know, the 0 to 30 might be served by the individual student in a studio apartment, you know, who's then supported by a senior, you know, living in an owned ownership unit.
Bridge Meadows is in all likelihood going to have a portion of, at least the last time I met with the county and Bridge Meadows, they're going to have a portion of Hillside and build a similar complex to what they've done up in North Portland and out in Beaverton for foster families and elders. So we are likely to be getting that exact model built.
Yeah, there's a great project from Alice and I, our alma mater, did, I guess it was the Housing Bureau did, but Reach did this project, 72nd and Foster, which is focused on Asian American families, but it's a multi-generational, intentional community that is exactly what Councilor Heisey described, sort of older folks that live either 2 or 1s and then families. And so there's kind of an intentionality between the tenanting that produces exactly what you're talking about. We know somebody who works at Reach, and so we can reach out to her and get some more information.
Cool. But I, you know, want to make sure that we stay on point that there are 400 and some odd homeless kids, school kids in North Clackamas. That sets them up for a world of hurt. And that is really, to whatever degree possible, what I would like to see targeted.
Great. Well, it sounds like we'll bring back the answers to some of these questions. Maybe that'll be good timing with the kind of the results of our access study as well.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions before we let Allison?
There's a question in the chat. I don't know if it's somebody who wants to comment on this. But.
Hang on a second. The answer is probably some of a lot of that. We have yet to make those decisions, but some of that money will go back to cover costs that we incurred during the pandemic.
Tune in next week.
Yeah. But yes, there is an opportunity potentially to use some portion of that. Okay, anything else? Anybody? No. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Central Milwaukie Bikeway. This will be presented by Brett Kelver. Welcome, Brett.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Gamba, councilors. I'm Brett Kelver, an associate planner with the city of Milwaukie, and I'm joined tonight by Derek Abe, who's been working with us from Alta Planning and Design. And I will share my screen. So it doesn't seem like that long ago, and it really hasn't been, I guess, but it was December of 2020 when we came to you last. We talked in December to the Planning Commission and came to you with an update about this project. And we're here again to check in and give you an update on where we are with this. So to quickly reset the stage for anyone new to the subject, the area that we're describing is Central Milwaukie and where we're working here, I'll just point out a couple features. So it includes 32nd Avenue, Harrison Street. We've got the Union Pacific Rail line here, and then the intersection of Highway 224 with Harrison Street. The Public Safety Building, the city's PSB, is here, and then Providence Milwaukie Hospital is in this area. So the purpose of this project has been to try to figure out how to most safely and feasibly connect the current southern end of the designated neighborhood greenway that we've identified on 29th Avenue with the work in progress currently, moving forward, Monroe Street Greenway, which provides an important east-west connection through the city. So the idea is to make a safe connection through Central Milwaukie to link those two facilities. We're looking to create something that is considered low stress, that is comfortable, that feels safe for all levels of riders, from the hardcore cyclists to just beginning cyclists and family riders. In terms of who we're looking to serve here, keep in mind that we've got people who are maybe coming through the area, who are coming from the Springwater Trail down 29th and trying to get on to points farther south or southeast or to downtown Milwaukie. And there are also people, especially with the redevelopment that's going to be happening in this area, who are going to be new residents and new visitors here. So folks may be coming to this area from somewhere else, or folks who are going to be future residents of this area who need to get out and get to other points. So there are several different, when we're thinking about who we're serving, there's several different perspectives there. One of the themes that came up when we did some of our public outreach were a lot of questions about, hey, it seems like it'd be a lot better to get downtown if we went down Harrison. And we have a project in the transportation system plan in the TSP. At some point, we're going to need to do something to make Harrison a safer route to downtown. But we wanted to be clear with folks that this is not that project. This project is really about trying to make a safe connection to through Central Milwaukie between these two facilities, 29th and the Monroe Street Greenways. And in terms of timing, it's important for us to be figuring this out now because of what we know and anticipate is going to be happening with redevelopment. I think you're all familiar with the kind of underway now. We have land use applications for the Clackamas County Housing Authority's Hillside Manor site, so we know that the site is in the process of redeveloping. We also have a proposal in from Providence for redevelopment of some senior housing at their site here at the corner of Llewellyn and 34th, and we know that at some point soon we're going to be seeing we anticipate at some point in the future, we're going to see redevelopment of the Murphy site. We also have already had an approval of new apartments at the former McFarland site, the Monroe apartment site. So it's important for us to try to figure out what to do in terms of a safe connection here. Where we started with this was the route that's shown in dark blue or purple. This was the route that was identified in our TSP as a way to connect through this area as a concept. It was kind of echoed in the Central Milwaukie Land Use and Transportation Plan. This is what's been on our concept plans for a while. As we've started to look more closely at this in light of this development that's coming, we recognize that there were some challenges with trying to figure out, most importantly, how to get across Harrison Street so close to the railroad tracks. And it was with that understanding and that assumption that we applied to the Department of Land Conservation Development for some assistance in taking a look to see if there were other options that might be more feasible or safer than that one. So, what we identified in this project initially in terms of labeling, we identified 3 options, and we called this what we're calling now the base case is option 1, 2, and 3. But we've since tried to be clear that what we're calling the base case was what was in our plan and what we're kind of reacting to in terms of trying to figure out if there's a feasible way to do that or if there are safer alternatives. And the two routes that we identified and have been focusing on in this work, all 3 routes, just to be clear and step back for 1 second, all 3 of them depend on the realignment of streets in the Hillside project. I mean, 29th Avenue will be extended for at least will be extended through the Hillside site. And so all 3 of these routes depend on that to get to Meek Street. Now, to be clear, there's not going to be a vehicle connection between the Hillside site and 29th. It will be accessible for pedestrians and bikes to get through, as I understand it. So they all 3 come down to Meek Street, and then the difference in the routes is kind of what they do from there. So what we're calling option 1 comes out to Meek Street and basically uses 32nd Avenue to cross Harrison Street using the signal there, and then to join up with the Oak Monroe alignment here. What we're calling option 2 goes to Meek Street, but then uses some of the more low volume streets of Llewellyn and 34th to connect through the city's water treatment facility to that route. So as we've moved forward through this, this is how we've been trying to identify these and look at these different routes. And I'll just real quickly, just to recap some of the pros and cons or some of the details for each of these routes. So looking at the base case, there are a couple things that make this challenging. And what we understood from the beginning, that trying to do an at-grade crossing of Harrison Street so close to the railroad tracks, and also really so close to the 2 existing signals at 32nd and Harrison and at Highway 224 in Harrison, was going to get some resistance, some significant resistance from ODOT Rail, and from the Union Pacific Rail Line folks. Just trying to, if you can imagine, I guess a couple of options. If you had an at-grade crossing where I show up on a bicycle and I activate some flashing lights so that when I want to go across, I stop traffic and come across. That if not coordinated with these signals, does present some concerns, I guess, for what happens to vehicle traffic and queuing and potential backups at those signals. And alternately, I think trying to put an actual, like maybe a new traffic signal in here in such a small space, I think also raises some concerns for ODOT and the railroad. And so it was with that understanding that we in looking at this base case scenario, started thinking a little bit about what would be involved if you try to just avoid the intersection at grade by either going over it or going under it. And once you start to look at those kinds of options, the cost goes quite a bit higher. There's also, to be fair, even though we believe that the Murphy site is going to redevelop at some point. We've had conversations with them. They're still not, don't have a definite proposal, but it is a point of uncertainty in terms of when that site will redevelop. And as you can see, this route depends on that. So, we already know that Hillside is coming. We know that the Providence site is coming. We know that apartments are coming at the Monroe apartment site. If Murphy does not redevelop for a while, and this is the route we're depending on, we're going to have a lot of new residents and people coming to and from this area without a way to safely get them through. So that's another drawback to this in terms of the timing, that the uncertainty of that development presents. Now, it's true, it is a very direct route. If you're a cyclist, especially just trying to get through this area, this does present a little bit more of that kind of almost bike highway feel. It's got this one single crossing of Harrison Street. It's very direct in terms of getting you most directly to the Monroe Street Greenway. But our assessment, and we'll talk more about it as we get farther into the presentation, was that this is probably not an idea to give up on in the long term, especially when what we want is some redundancy in our system. It would not be bad to have this, for the people, especially who are just trying to get through the area onto somewhere else, or who are in there and trying to get out more directly to somewhere else. This is not a bad thing to pursue. And I think the recommendation that is in this report is that we continue to keep this option open as the Murphy site does finally come in to redevelop, and look for funding sources, look to see what we can do to study, how to safely make this crossing happen so that we don't preclude this from happening. But the sense was that this is probably more of a long-term option than one that could be achieved more in the near term. Option 1, which focuses on 32nd Avenue, is still relatively direct. It does bring you through the area. I know that was one of the points that I think it was Councilor Faulkner brought that up when we were talking about this back in December, was the importance of making sure that people have access into kind of the heart of this area where there are already shops. We're expecting, more activities and things to happen, and this route does do that. It does depend on the existing intersection at Harrison. And there is not a lot of space there. And so what would happen, whether you try to put the facility on the west side of 32nd or the east side, it's going to require some acquisition of property from some of the businesses that are there. And depending on where and how you do it, it will be more or less disruptive. But for example, if you try to stay on the west side, you're looking at needing to get some right-of-way dedication from Kimmy's Market, and also a chunk from the Purdy's operation here in order to make that connection. So in terms of do we have what we need right now to do this, that presents those additional complications and expenses. In addition, if you can imagine getting the increased development that we are anticipating and in fact want in this area, this intersection is only going to get busier over time, and probably need to get a little bit bigger. And hearkening back to what we're thinking about in terms of what we're trying to achieve is a facility that feels comfortable and safe. And that's not to say there aren't ways to get people across there safely, but if you can imagine, like if you've tried crossing, for example, the intersection of Highway 224 in Harrison on a bicycle, I mean, it feels like a long way to go. This wouldn't quite be that big, but the larger the intersection gets and the bigger the spacing, the more uncomfortable it can feel for folks. So those are some of the drawbacks there. And then looking at option 2, this is an option that also takes you through the heart of this area. It minimizes, relatively speaking, the amount of time that you're on or along some of the busier streets. It does have a little more out of direction travel depending on where you're trying to go, but as we measured it at the end of the day, it's actually not that much farther distance than the other 2 routes. It does depend on several crossings of streets, that is crossing 32nd at Meek and then crossing Harrison at 34th. It would use this kind of current dead end on 34th. It dead ends at the city's water facility, and we've identified that there is room to put a multi-use path through that through our facility to make a connection here to Oak and Monroe. Now, some of these things, some of the features that are needed with this route are things that are going to be needed anyway. For example, this crossing of 32nd at Meek, there's a TriMet bus stop on the east side of the street. Obviously, the hospital is on the east side of the street. People are going to need to get across here anyway, and so making this crossing safe enough for both pedestrians and bicycles feels like kind of a win-win. And then while it's not a signalized crossing right now, I mean, this is an official crossing at 34th and Harrison. It does present some challenges with, how close it is to the downhill, but it is a fair distance from the current intersection, the signal with 32nd. And, we've identified some ways that intersection or a crossing there could be made safe. I think depending on how things are set up, what we would understand are these crossings would, again, be ones that are user activated. So when you think about the amount of time that you might wait here, it will depend strictly on just kind of when you can stop traffic rather than waiting for an actual traffic signal to go. So in terms of our assessment of this felt like something that includes components that are already also in our TSP of connections and projects that need to be done. It's a relatively low cost one that could be done as soon as it, I think we're going to want something in place, like I said, as soon as the hillside development happens. And because this depends on more local streets and just a couple of key crossings and not the redevelopment of a whole other site, it feels like one that can be achieved in the near term. So with that, let me just quickly recap what we did in terms of reaching out to the community. We did have conversations with some of the who we identified as key stakeholders, some of the property owners or representatives of the Housing Authority, the Murphy redevelopment site, Providence, Milwaukie Hospital. We talked to the owners of the Harrison Plaza who have the space there on the northeast corner, 32nd and Harrison. Had several conversations with them. We did kind of a two-part public outreach thing using our Engage Milwaukie website. What we did in January was we just put out a kind of an online survey where we showed all three of the route options and got feedback from people. And then we followed up in February with more of like an online discussion where we presented an updated version of the conceptual report, the version that's in your packet, and we're able to kind of moderate and have some discussion and answer questions from folks. And what was interesting, what we learned from these outreach efforts were a couple of things. One, it seemed like there was consensus with the key stakeholders that they felt like option 2, the option that used Llewellyn and 34th to get through the area was their preferred choice. It seemed to be the safest to them. It seemed to offer the least amount of impact to existing businesses and kind of the future development there. And what was interesting about the larger public feedback was we saw a lot of responses with the online survey of people recognizing that base case option is a great one. It's very direct. It seems very clean and clear. And I think we were able to, when we presented the revised the revised draft and we're able to have some discussion with folks online, I think a lot of people recognize that it was, while it would still be good to pursue that base case option, that for the near term, that option 2 seemed to be the most feasible and seemed to make sense in terms of presenting that kind of low stress route that we're looking for. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over briefly to Derek and let him tell you a little bit about the scoring or the analysis, the assessment that we did of the routes, and explain a little bit more about that.
All right, thanks, Brett. Good evening, Mayor Gamba and councilors. Thanks for having me this evening. I wanted to provide you with at least a summary of our evaluation of these options that Brett just outlined. And I know, our tendency is to kind of zero in on the scoring in the bottom right-hand corner there, but I want to walk you through some of the assumptions that were made around each of these options and then the scoring criteria itself. So, to start with, as Brett kind of mentioned, these options were developed in close, consultation with the stakeholders, considering, what are some of the issues that we're encountering there today on the street, and what are some of the major issues that they could see with some of these potential options as we've been developing them. And, in each of these cases, the base case, option 1 and option 2, what we're really striving for is, routes that would result in, the highest and best levels of safety and comfort, right? I think we all know that on the ground today, there are conditions there that are quite scary, are frankly, leave a lot of room for improvement. But what we're trying to do is consider what could be done at that highest level of safety and comfort. So with each of these, there are a number of assumptions that are built into the types of improvements that we're considering, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, with each of these criteria, I just want to explain what it is we're actually considering. So I think safety and comfort are fairly straightforward. Comfort, of course, referring to that perceived safety or how stressful each of these routes might be, or certain segments or transitions along these routes, how comfortable they are. Route directness is actually measured in two ways. So the first is through the area, right? What is going to be the fastest, quickest way, shortest path from point A to point B? And that would be from the current terminus of the 29th Ave Greenway north of the Housing Authority's Hillside Manor site, all the way down to Monroe and Oak Street, the intersection there. So that's what we're referring to when we say route directness. The second measure of directness is actually, direct access to the destinations within the project area. So not just traveling through the area, but how do we ensure that folks are going to have a way to get to those businesses in and around the intersection of 32nd and Harrison. The alignment with development plans at many of the key properties in and around this study area was really key, because we know that they're all kind of happening on different timelines, right? And that's going to have major bearing on what we're able to implement on the ground in the near term, and what options might be presented for a longer term phased approach. Feasibility here, this is actually something that was called to my attention earlier. It's a little bit misleading because, it says there in parentheses related to approvals process and or regulatory constraints. And while feasibility certainly factors those things, what we're also talking about and what we're trying to focus on here is constructability, right? The potential for phasing, project readiness, and to what extent we can have developers as a part of new development chip in to some of the improvements along their frontages. And then lastly, cost, right? And these are all, of course, relative to one another, these scores. And I should back up and say that, although this is sort of a quantitative measure of comparison of these options, the criterion here are really sort of intended as ranked options or ranked measures of each of these options relative to one another, right? So the scores don't necessarily reflect the actual magnitude of the criterion for each route, but a relative measure for the sake of comparison. So with that, I want to see if there are any quick questions about any of that.
Yeah, Derek, good.
Councilor Beatty has a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Mayor.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask about the access to destinations and project area.
Yep.
So base case is, assuming destinations in project area are, there's destinations at either end, whatever comes in Hillside and Milwaukie Marketplace. But when you're talking about the Harrison center of the project area, it seems to me the destinations are 32nd and Harrison. And so you have the base case is, a block this way, and the option 2 is a block that way. And I don't see why one is preferable to the other in terms of access to destinations in project area. Can you explain to me why those got different scores?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess the way that we're thinking about this is that, with the base case, if we're considering a shared use path that it kind of flies over, thanks, Brett, that flies over Harrison, and lands, if we're heading from north to south, and lands south of Harrison, continues along the railroad, and kind of approaches where 32nd transitions to Railroad Avenue. That is the nearest access point to that intersection, yes, which is only a block away. But the destinations that we were really considering are north of that intersection. So you would then have to cross the intersection, the busy intersection that this option is really trying to avoid.
Okay, so that's if it's a flyover. What if it's an at grade?
If it is an at grade, well, so I should back up and say the assumption with this particular scoring matrix is that it is a flyover and that it is either an overcrossing or an undercrossing. So that's what the scores reflect for this. Now, if it was at grade, it may have very well received a different score, right? Because then you would be essentially connecting to that intersection via Harrison.
And it's actually closer. Until I looked at this map, I didn't realize it's actually closer than the 34th, than the option 2 is to the intersection. So, yeah.
It is a little bit closer, right? Of course, we would also have to consider how we would transition folks in that northbound direction, right? So if you are having to cross the street, at what point would you cross the street? What facility would you connect to? Presumably on the east side of the street, right? If you're heading northbound, how would you handle those transitions? Is something that we would have to investigate there. But you're right. It is a little bit closer to the nearest point where option 2 reaches at Llewellyn and 32nd. It is
it seemed to me those were the same. I didn't feel like those merited a different scoring on that.
Well, to be fair, I think, option 2, if you are trying to get to the Harrison Plaza, by the time you get to Llewellyn Street, you're almost there. I mean, you're basically a parking lot away. You just have to come a little bit south to get, in fact, you can get into the parking lot from the Harrison Plaza off of Llewellyn Street. And I think the concept, and maybe in terms of thinking about adjusting scores, I mean, maybe a 1 is too low, but I think part of the point of noting the difference was that both options 1 and 2 do bring you closer into the heart of that area rather than, even if it's not by much. I mean, the kind of part of the point of the base case was to kind of, it's almost designed to keep you a little bit farther away from some of that.
And to keep you from having to cross Harrison at grade, right? That's kind of the appeal of that base case scenario.
Thank you.
Great, that was a really good question. Thank you.
I have further questions on the scoring.
Sure, Mayor. Go ahead.
Traffic safety, exposure to vehicle traffic, and potential conflicts. So you give the base case of 4 because in your scenario where it's an off-grid crossing, there are literally 0 crossings of major streets, right?
Correct. Well, it depends on where you're going once you reach the endpoints, right? But
let's
yes, you're avoiding Harrison.
The entire route from whatever, Monroe to 29th.
Yes.
You have 0 crossings of major streets at grade.
Correct. Yes.
Option 2, which you give 3 points, has 3 crossings of major roads.
Enhanced crossings with rectangular rapid flashing beacons, perhaps some medians, other crossing enhancements, in addition to marked crosswalks, which would go a long ways towards improving them in terms of safety and comfort than the crossings that we see there today.
Well, if you pay attention to what traffic's doing coming down Harrison, those people are looking at the light at 224. They're trying to catch that light. That's their goal in life.
At 224 or 32nd?
224.
Okay.
And they're moving fast. They're not. I ride this route all 4 directions all the time. And the worst part of it is the downhill traffic on Harrison. It is the most dangerous part. all of a sudden putting up a yellow flashing beacon, we're very likely to lose people at that intersection. The other piece about that is imagine riding north and you're with a family. And you've got a couple little kids who are the wobbly starters. That's an uphill start at a stop. And as a cyclist, you probably know that riding uphill from a stop is a lot harder than downhill or even flat.
How much of an uphill are we talking about? Because I mean, you know, I've walked it, I've ridden it, and it is a little bit of a slope, but I mean.
It's enough that a wobbly kid is going to have trouble with it. So you've got a parent trying to look both ways at traffic that may or may not be stopping for a flashing yellow beacon, and trying to get a pair of wobbly kids or something across that street. And yet you're giving that a 3. That, in my mind, compared to option 1, if we're doing a cycle track on 32nd, you know, an off-grade, grade separated cycle track on 32nd, that's far safer than 3 crossings of major streets, one of which is uphill one direction. So I think the scoring on that is poor. And for the same reason, I think the route comfort stress, for the exact same reasons I've just outlined, is also scored really poorly. I agree with Lisa's, you know, critique of the access to destination. And then lastly is feasibility related to approvals process and or regulatory constraints. Option 1 scoring a 1 is a purchase of 6 feet of right-of-way for a block.
And I'll add a reconstruction of the entire intersection to accommodate the bike facilities there. So it is fairly significant in terms of constructability and the improvements that we would likely need to overhaul that intersection.
And if we don't do an off-grade crossing on the base case, I don't think, I mean, yes, arguing with ODOT and the railroad, if that's the entirety of the feasibility, but it seems a pretty extreme contrast between 4 and 0 for that. So I'm not a super big fan of the scoring process in general. I don't think it took a lot of reality into.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Sort of, Mayor, I'm sorry, you left off, I think, with feasibility, but cost also kind of caught my attention, because especially now, if I understand that these assumptions are base case or for some sort of an above grade, then I don't know how cost could be lower for base case than option 1, even if we're talking about a little bit of right of way. And I don't know that, you know, I'm not an engineer, of course, but, you know, I think the last time we talked about this, I asked the question about scramble intersection, pedestrian scrambles as an option to maybe help reduce the cost of, you know, rebuilding an intersection there. So I guess I would also want to know what assumptions are built into the construction of option 1 that make it higher than building an elevated structure so close to freight rail. I'm very confused about that one.
Yeah, so I think we all understand that an overcrossing would be fairly expensive, right? I mean, we're talking about you know, ramps and walls and the structure itself, possibly elevators. You know, so that's expensive. How does option 1 compare to that, and why does it rank lower here? Well, I think the assumption there with option 1 is that, you know, we are going to have to require right of way. We are going to have to rebuild 32nd. We're going to have to rebuild the intersection at 32nd to accommodate all of that space. Geometrically, we would need much more real estate at each of these corners to provide a separated bike facility that would that would provide, you know, a crossing there that would be comfortable for families, for young kids, right? And so the reconstruction of that intersection is largely what that includes. With that includes, you know, stormwater improvements, you know, and it's possible that on the southwest corner of the intersection, where we're getting really close to that building, that there could be impacts to the building, to the structure that's there. So, you know, these are relative measures again. You know, I think we could argue that with both of these, they are orders of magnitude different than option 2. But there could be some room for, you know, some cost savings with either of them. So that hopefully that kind of explains where we landed with those scores. With regard to the pedestrian scramble, you know, that's an improvement that you typically see in at intersections with really high pedestrian demand. And I think the argument could be made that this could be a location where we might see that when we have the Hillside site redeveloped, when the Murphy site redevelops, right? But what that also means is that we would need to consider the signal timing impacts and the phasing impacts on that intersection, right? When you add a new phase like a pedestrian scramble or a bike signal for that matter, what you're often doing is you're reallocating time on the clock, right, for a full signal cycle to that new phase, which means shortening the phase for the other movements, the other traffic movements, for turning movements, for the queues that are likely backing up as folks are trying to cross the railroad and cross 224. So there are impacts, both geometric, physical, spatial impacts, and then sort of the temporal impacts as well with the signal timing. So
does a scramble intersection necessarily mean no right on red? I guess it must.
Yeah, in that phase, it would. Yeah. But that intersection is already no right on red.
In the southbound.
Southbound. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there are some interesting considerations with this particular intersection, notably the movement that Mayor, you're alluding to, the southbound to westbound right-hand turn right in front of Kimmy's Market there. And that is the one leg of the intersection that we currently do not have a marked crosswalk, right? And that is largely due to the fact that we know we have a high volume of turning movements there, going in that direction.
And many of them illegal.
Right. And there are, I think, some issues related there to the actual timing of the signal as well, right? How much time we're allocating to various movements, and the phasing there. So I don't know if Steve is on the line, if Steve has anything to add to that, the operations of that signal, but those are just some of the considerations that we would have to work out if we were to consider something like a ped scramble.
In these projects, are we even starting to look at some of the new smart lights that sense how much traffic, that sense pedestrians, that sense bicyclists, that actually see them coming and plan for the timing? I know that they've installed some out in Hillsborough, but I haven't seen anything in Clackamas County.
That's a good question. I mean, that is certainly something that we could consider as a part of this project, you know, but that would also assume that we then have bikeways on 32nd, I imagine, or Harrison for that matter. I think what you're mostly alluding to, Mayor, is what we typically call like the green wave, where bikes are detected in advance of the intersection. So, you know, we can estimate how long it's going to be before they arrive at the intersection and coordinate the signal to provide, you know, green time reduce the delay experienced by cyclists.
But it also reduces the delay for automobiles because it's sensing the movement of automobiles rather than just an arbitrary, whatever, minute and a half.
Right.
If I might add to the conversation.
Sure, there he is. Hey, Steve.
Yeah, I've been here all along, just sitting quietly. What Mayor Gamba was talking about are intelligent traffic cabinets. I know Wilsonville installed them a few years ago. There's actually a new upgraded brand since then that we are looking to install within this city. But what they do is you preset it for a certain amount of time for green, yellow, red in each direction. And as the signal, as it recognizes a lack of traffic, it starts shortening the green time. And it does it so incrementally. And so it adjusts it to other areas. And you as a programmer say, I want to emphasize this turning movement or this through movement. And the signal automatically adjusts throughout the day to maximize the green time. I know that there's other things like what you're talking about, Derek, about sensing bicyclists coming. There's actually some advanced sensors out on various roads in Clackamas County. Scott Holscher can talk to you more about them. He's pretty familiar with where these are located at. But yeah, they'll pre-sense them, and those are typically used on streets that have a little bit lower volume. I know the one near us is over by Sunnyside Road in Sunnybrook. It's coming south from Sunnyside on Sunnybrook Road. There's a pre-sensor that will recognize a bike and will allow the green time for the bike to go across Sunnybrook. That's the nearest one that I am familiar with. But the problem with the signals in this area, and if you locate the base case, I do not think that ODOT Rail, ODOT Transportation, Clackamas County, or Union Pacific Railroad will accept any kind of bike crossing there, electronic enhanced, whether it's yellow flashing, whether it's an RFB. I don't think they'll allow it. I don't know if they would allow a full signalized crossing there. It has to be tied into the others, but they get really nervous when you do stuff so close to a major rail line and a fairly busy highway. And I really think that they're going to fight hard to protect everything they have there. And I don't see it as a feasible option, no matter how long someone talks to them for. I don't see them coming around. But again, I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying I have a hard time saying that.
Right. The conversations that the city has had with ODOT to date, ODOT Rail, about a crossing in that vicinity at 31st there would certainly indicate that that is not something that is likely to be approved by them.
Well, and what I hear and what I heard in the staff report as well is it will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of staff time, which is a resource. And meanwhile, we have these large developments that are happening. And the best way to create a cyclist is to, from day one, have it be possible for them to go out their door and get someplace relatively easily. So I am concerned about choosing an option that can be ready for these folks when they move in and want to get downtown. And we also have a lot of cyclists who are in Ardenwald right now who aren't being served. So I know that none of these options are perfect or without problems, but just being pragmatic for a moment, I don't see us building an overpass, even if we had the ODOT, all of the approvals, or redesigning all of the intersection at 32nd on a timeline that's going to accommodate these people that are going to be arriving in the not too distant future. So, this is interesting, but I don't necessarily see how it applies. It seems to me like option 2, even though it has a lot of challenges, is kind of the best case scenario for meeting the needs of our community today, and not closing the door on other opportunities should they arise, but trying to meet the needs of the community that we have right now and will have in the not too distant future.
Steve, when is 30 seconds on the safe schedule?
Priority 1 required, and Llewellyn is not even mapped. And so one of my major concerns is that all of a sudden we are now using this as, and instead of what we had previously mapped to be our priority route for this area. And 32nd and Harrison was chosen for a reason, and it's because even if we build Llewellyn the way in the way it's designed in option 2, we absolutely are going to still have just as many pedestrians using 32nd and Harrison. I promise you. So if we do not deal with it, and we're trying to tell people in mobility devices or walkers to walk an extra 2 blocks out of their way in the wrong direction to get to the hopefully soon, eventually. I understand they're long blocks. It's 1 block. We have long blocks here in the city. It's 32nd to 34th. It's 2 blocks. Walking the wrong direction to get to eventually to a grocery store, bypassing and then not even interacting with the places they're already interacting with, which is, that little tiny section of commercial at Kimmy's and the office. They're going to use 32nd anyway. So we're going to still have people in the street sharing the road, mobility devices sharing the road with cars if we don't construct it on 32nd.
32nd has to be rebuilt, whether we decide to put this here or not, period. And it's on the schedule somewhere. I don't know where.
Yeah, and to be clear, or you go ahead and finish, Mayor. Sorry.
Can I share my screen for a second? Can everybody see that? All right, so I was on the TSP committee back 100 years ago when we did this last time. So was Lisa. This is, so the 29th Railroad Couplet, or whatever you want to call that extension, is the north-south bicycle route through Milwaukie. There is one other further out that's eventually we'll get there, but it doesn't reach as many destinations. So this is the major north-south route. We gave up some straight line, off the road access across the McFarland thing. So look at you got the red line, that's roughly the original transportation system plan line. More or less direct, very few crossings of roads, far less time spent actually on roads. Now we gave up that, so we have this zigzag. This is the blue line represents A, what is already being planned, and B, what we're talking about throwing in. So now instead of a red line that goes more or less straight, you have this ridiculous zigzag for, what is that, 8 blocks, 9 blocks? In 20 years, some cyclist coming through there is going to go, what in the hell were they thinking when they designed this? I get that it's more expensive. I get that there's difficulties, but we're talking about infrastructure that, you can talk all you want about, then someday in the future, we can change this and make it better. Won't happen. If there's a route, it won't happen. I guarantee it. It'll be, that's the route. It's good enough for the stupid bicyclist because, the real people and real cars need to be able to go. So if we choose a route that frankly, I believe is far less safe because it crosses 4 major intersections, it crosses 3 times. It crosses 32nd, it crosses Harrison at a place that A, people are moving fast downhill, looking further out than that intersection, have not expected to see people crossing, and will be wobbly for people on the uphill approach. And then you have to cross Oak or Monroe, whatever you want to call it, right there at an intersection, which I'm sure you've all been in. That intersection is a little dicey anyway, and it's pretty heavily trafficked. It's heavily trafficked enough that it became a big problem when we were designing the Monroe Greenway. So now you're introducing a movement that doesn't even exist now to cross, whatever you're calling it, Monroe or Oak, right there at that strange T intersection two-way stop thing. I don't personally believe that the 34th Avenue Llewellyn route is even remotely as safe as a cycle track on 32nd. And I believe that we have to rebuild 32nd and Harrison in any case. So I'm still a fan of the original route. I think it's better in a lot of ways. I get that the railroad's God and they get to decide everything. But I certainly don't think this new route is superior to 32nd.
Yeah. No, I really, really applaud the vision, Mayor Gamba. This is, I mean, you know, the lines in the TSP map are, I think, very aspirational, right? I think that would, in the best, you know, case scenario, be the most direct route, be the most separated from vehicles route, and minimize the number of crossings. But I did want to also respond to the point that was made earlier by Councilor Faulkner about, you know, the likelihood that pedestrians are going to have to go toward 34th to cross the street, you know, if the Llewellyn route, if option 2 is built. I don't think we're saying that the implementation of option 2 would necessarily preclude the improvements at 32nd and Harrison. In fact, pedestrians are always going to use that route, right? The crossings there are there today, and they will continue to be there. But this is essentially the neighborhood greenway route alternative to that. So pedestrians and folks with mobility devices would have both options to cross at either of those locations.
Yeah, I appreciate they wouldn't go away. My concern is that we spend a ton of money on something that wasn't mapped, and then we sort of lose sight of the fact that the pedestrian facilities on 32nd, especially right there, are so squeezed. There are sections right where we're talking about, and if you've walked it, you've seen it, where there are poles,
yes,
you know, in the middle of the sidewalk, and that is where you see, you know, folks in their automated wheelchairs sharing the road, with cars because they have no other choice. And so I guess, you know, I don't want this to somehow, you know, replace what was mapped as a very high priority facility.
And even, you know, 32nd, we don't even have proper ramps at that intersection. So a wheelchair has a hard time right now, today. And I can tell you that a lot of cyclists are also not going to take that Llewellyn route. So they're going to be on 32nd anyway.
Yeah, for those folks that want to continue that are comfortable enough riding on 32nd today, I mean, they may likely continue to ride that way. I think what this is proposing is that a neighborhood greenway environment, although it is a little less direct, is going to provide a more comfortable experience for the families, for the cyclists of all ages and abilities who may not be that confident or experienced riding on 32nd. The other point I just want to make really quickly about one of the appeals that I see with option 2 is that, you know, it is taking advantage of some lower volume streets, some lower traffic streets, but it also does provide some direct connections to other parts of the bike network that we've heard are important, you know, so coming along King and turning down 34th, depending on where you're going, in some ways, the route on option 2, as depicted in option 2, may provide more direct connections depending on where you're going, right? So I just want us to keep that in mind as well, because not everyone's going to be traveling from A to B. They're going to be, right, making connections here and there. So I just want to make that point.
Thanks, Derek. I want to be mindful of the time because I know there are other items on the agenda. I'm glad we've had this much time for the discussion, and I want to tell you what we were hoping to do and what we'd like to get from you, I guess. What we had originally planned to do was come back to you in May, kind of May 4th, I think, asking you to adopt or approve this plan. And what I've gotten from this discussion is there are still questions about it. And I guess what would be helpful in terms of direction and understanding that we've kind of got our own problems in a staff way in terms of like we're working with limited amount of funding provided by DLCD. We're about at the end of that time. That may be a problem we can try to figure out a remedy to, but I guess it would be helpful to understand what you need as the council or what questions you would want to have answered. I mean, how do we get to a point where you would be comfortable approving the plan that we put in front of you? What are outstanding questions? What's still needed? I have two. One is some sense of the cost of option 2 versus the cost of option 1. And the other is, what's the timeline if we do option 1? It seems to me like option 2 is relatively easy to implement. When we've talked about 32nd in the past, it has been, well, we need to do the TSP first. The TSP is going to take a couple of years. And then once it's done in the TSP, it has to be scheduled and we have to find the funding and all of that. So I am concerned that for all that option 1 with the cycle track is perhaps the best option, it may take a fair amount of time and leave the community hanging in the meantime. Okay, that's helpful. What else?
Corollary question is how fast the first buildings will be done at Hillside, right? Or I mean, we know probably Monroe Apartments going to be done sooner, but this is really more important for the Hillside and the Providence and the Murphy site. So what's realistic about when the first buildings are going to be done, ready for occupancy at Hillside?
Well, not only the buildings, but the road.
Yeah. Right.
If that's not connected, this is all moot.
Right.
Because you're on 32nd.
Okay, good.
And I do actually think that it's important for Monroe too, because if you're working in Portland, that's going to be your bike commute route possibly. So, I mean, you could also go to the trolley trail, but it depends on where in Portland you're going.
Red, on Hillside, are you familiar with the completion date? I am. I can give it if you like.
Yeah, I'm not, Steve.
Clackamas County Housing has given us 7 years to complete it. So this just passed through Planning Commission a couple of weeks ago. So from start to finish, it's 7 years. They're going to start in the southeast corner and build the first 2 buildings there. So right along Meek and right along 32nd is going to be their first phase. Second phase is moving to the west, which is going over towards the existing 7-story building right there. The connection on 29th is the last phase going north. So we may not get 29th connected up to the neighborhood north of Hillside. Could be a full 7 years, or if development happens quicker, it could occur quicker than that.
So plenty of time to get 32nd figured out and built. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, the other concerns that weren't mentioned about 32nd is the west leg. I think there's a reason they closed that crosswalk years ago, and it's closed to this day. And two of the predominant movements through that interchange, as we all know, is southbound 32nd to westbound Harrison and eastbound Harrison to northbound 32nd. That's a lot of the volume. The rest of it tends to go straight through on Harrison. So with the movement from 32nd to Harrison's, why they probably closed that crosswalk. And if we open it for a multi-use path, as Derek mentioned, it'll impact the green time for the rest of the intersection. And if to put the path down to that, to build a full width path down to that interchange may require acquiring land from Kimmy's Market and eliminating parking stalls that they currently have on the east side of the market. If they lose those parking stalls, is the business still viable? I don't know. And if the business is not viable, then we, the city, by state law, are required to purchase the entire property. So that's something, I don't know what the impacts would be, but if some judge rules that we're taking away so much parking, we're making the business impossible to operate, that's the solution to that.
Have you ever seen that parking lot full or even have more than 2 cars in it?
I don't travel that way much. I understand what I'm just like, you know, what my knowledge is, and we have to make sure that business is viable if we take away parking on the west side. I do not know what the impacts are. I do know that that West Lake crossing is dangerous and will increase in the number of cars using it as these developments occur.
Do you think it's more dangerous than 34th, given that people are already moving at a high rate of speed down 34th?
I think the right hook movement's the most dangerous movement to a cyclist. I think there's studies nationwide that show a right hook take out more cyclists than almost any other thing. I think if you're going to cross at 32nd, I think the east leg shows more safety. Again, though, that's not really where you want cyclists to be, is on the east side, because then again, you got to cross 32nd, you still got to cross Harrison. And what do you do when you bring them out on the police fire building there? So it's not the ideal way. But as far as safety across the street, I think the east leg is the safest crossing, and I think pedestrians will continue to use that east leg.
And Mayor, if I could, you know, I don't want to speak to other projects, you know, but I think what I would like to see if option 2 were to move forward would be additional traffic calming on Harrison, right? Speed humps, traffic calming to slow traffic as they approach westbound on the downhill. You know, things like medians wouldn't visually and physically narrow the roadway. Relocation of the bus stop from a near side to a far side would go a long ways to eliminate the multiple threat, as we call it, right? Cars passing the bus, weaving around, doing, you know, unpredictable high-speed maneuvers. So additional traffic calming, speed reduction on Harrison, I think would go a long way to help with that particular crossing as well.
Well, I was wondering about that, and like, you know, medians, bulb outs, other things, but you do have fire trucks leaving from right there. So you have some limits on, you know, what works with that and what constraints you can put on them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have a toolbox of design interventions that we can employ, but, you know, to really understand what's feasible at that intersection, we'd have to study and actually do some design work to look at turning radii, to look at types of traffic calming that could impact emergency response. So.
Is it fair to understand right now, based on your discussion, that the bigger question is between options 1 and 2 and not the base case? Or are there questions that you have about the base case that you would want to have answered to be able to put it to rest, or make you want to push farther for it?
Personally, I like the base case. I even like the base case with at grade. I wasn't assuming the flyover. And I do think we want to keep it in there as an expectation of the Murphy site redevelopment, at least at this point, until we've, you know, flushed out. I thought, based on before this discussion, just based on the staff report, I kind of thought, well, if we're going to go with option 2, the recommendation, I still want to keep the base case, not just as some vague future thing, but as part of the Murphy site redevelopment.
Yeah, we want to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, any final thoughts or questions from you? And I guess we'll step back and try to figure out how to move forward with this. But are there any other outstanding questions or concerns?
Yeah, I'm a long way from convinced that option 2 is the best option.
I don't know if this is even was before closing the crosswalk to cross Harrison at 32nd on that west side. Was it even considered to disallow a right turn and force cars to continue straight through 32nd to access 224 at a different location?
Oak.
I don't know. I don't know how long the crosswalk was eliminated. I don't know when it was done. I don't know what the considerations, but again, would be putting all the traffic. Only other cross is Oak to 224, Oak to Campbell to Monroe to 224. The morning hours, we know, and even in the evening, most of the traffic is Harrison to northbound 224.
Okay. Okay. Well, I feel like we should let you all move on. Thank you for the discussion, for the questions, and the back and forth. This is helpful, and we'll step back and figure out where to go from here. So, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on, I gotta unpile all this and find my script. All right, our next item is body worn cameras, a discussion with Police Chief Luke Straight.
Mayor, I'm actually going to jump in just for 1 second. Councilor Beatty, did you have something first?
I was just going to ask if we could take a little break. I mean, we've got 2 more items, so, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to just give a little bit of context about why we're here tonight for individuals who are out in the community and watching. Over the past 5 years, the concept of body-worn cameras and dash cams have been raised several times. Typically, when it's been raised by community members or by counselors. It has come up this year from our community members and council members as well. But part of the timing of this is because in the past, when we've talked about doing this, it's been a really high cost, and there just wasn't the ratio to benefit to cost wasn't there. We have a really terrific department with low complaint volume, and we've also been blessed with some excellent officers and police leadership. And the reason we're here tonight is because those same individuals brought this forward to me and to the chief and to some of the city leadership to talk about where they are right now. And they are actually the ones who are asking for adding dash cams and body-worn cameras to our transparency toolkit. I just think it says a lot about our employees for bringing this forward tonight, and I really wanted to call out that in this moment and to thank them for bringing it forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Straight to talk about it for a bit.
Thank you, Ann. Good evening, Mayor Gamba, Council President Falconer, and councilors. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Not anymore. It's Council President Heisey.
I'm so sorry. Council President Heisey. That would explain the laugh from my boss right away. I'm going to share my screen and see if I can get the right thing up here. This is intended to be a fairly quick briefing on body-worn cameras as opposed to a deep dive, to give you folks some information and kind of let you know some of the issues as they've developed over the last year. Some folks, community members and city staff aren't aware that a long time ago, back in the 90s and early 2000s, we had in-car cameras, not in every vehicle. And those were around for about a decade. We went with kind of a cheap product, and I overlapped with that equipment, but I don't remember a lot of experience with them. They were in a few vehicles, and they generally served us well. They aged out over time, and we didn't prioritize replacing them. At about the time they were sort of aging out and naturally coming to their end of life, much newer and more progressive equipment with a lot more features had evolved. And the price tag that was with that was exponentially a lot more expensive than we were prepared for at that time. And it just wasn't really prioritized for us. The camera systems have continued to evolve, and they do come up generally every year. We receive questions both from community members and occasionally from counselors, as you know. In the past, those systems have been too expensive for us, or like Ann said, the cost that was associated with them just really didn't seem to balance out for us when we evaluated the need and what we would accomplish with them. Each year we have received more inquiries, and we've received more this past 12 to 14 months than we ever have. The answer that we've been giving community members and council as well was that we committed to do some more research and reevaluate the costs and provide some of that information back to council and the community members. And then also just as an agency, reevaluate our position on those based on some more current research. As I mentioned, that technology has progressed and improved dramatically. It tends to be a lot smaller now than it was 15 or 20 years ago. There are some fairly impressive features with it. They're much more user-friendly than they were. And some of that includes our ability to manage the video evidence that they create. With equipment like this, one of the impacts is managing the public records requests that we can expect to come with them. As that equipment has continued to evolve, the features that allow us to manage it and to edit it, redact information, and then comply with public records requests has become a lot more user-friendly. And that's one of the takeaways that we've learned from other agencies around us. And we've certainly looked hard at agencies that are our size just to better evaluate the impact to staff of bringing technology like that on board, given a bandwidth issue for agencies our size. And generally, we have heard from some agencies our size that they brought those on within the last 3 to 5 years, and that it's actually been a fairly manageable project. So that was encouraging. Some of the things that would cause us to take a much harder look at this, obviously, is transparency and accountability issues and public trust. Those are things that we've all talked a lot about over the past 20 years, but even more so the last year or so. Transparency is critical, and that the video evidence or body-worn cameras or in-car cameras are not an option that we've offered to our staff or to the community anytime in the last 15 years. As agencies increasingly bring those programs on board, it seems to be becoming more of a general expectation or more of the norm. And we get compared to other agencies around us and agencies our size who have either in-car cameras or body-worn cameras. And it does seem to increasingly be the norm around us. As we evaluate high-profile incidents, whether they're here for us or locally here in the Tri-County area or across the country, video evidence is obviously one of the requests that community and city staff would naturally have. We always want the most information possible when we evaluate how we're delivering services, how well we're doing that, our strengths, our weaknesses, and any areas where we can improve. And that has not been an option that we've offered to the public or other city staff anytime recently. And I do believe we'll continue to get compared to that as a possible evolving best practice, and as other agencies around us provide that type of programming. I don't think there's any denying that it can provide additional information that can be critical. And that information can relate to police use of force. Obviously, we don't generally see that on video here with our own agency, but we've all had the opportunity to see video from elsewhere in the state or from across the country. We generally, as an agency, are never going to turn information away. We recognize there's almost no information source that's perfect, but we still want all the information we can get. And this is one more potential source of information that does seem to be attainable that we don't currently have. Additionally, for us to be able to evaluate video of the way we deliver services, whether we're talking about use of force, traffic stops, or any other significant police interaction, it can be a valuable training tool for us just in informing us how we're doing, and again, what our strengths and weaknesses are, and if there are any areas we need to focus on improving or training. So some of the concerns that either we previously knew or we've heard over the past few months as we've looked at this, it's important to note that with body-worn cameras, the camera is worn literally generally on the police officer's chest area. It's typically a little bit smaller maybe than a cell phone. And obviously police officers move around a lot, and that video is not perfect. So the advantage of technology like that is it's going to go anywhere the officer goes with a body-worn camera. If you compare that to in-car cameras, those are cameras that are mounted within the vehicle, and in an ideal formats, they're mounted all around the vehicle. So you have essentially 360-degree coverage around those vehicles. However, as the police officer moves significantly away from the vehicle, you naturally lose that video evidence. And then as they get a certain distance away, the remote mic that the officer wears to pick up audio automatically disconnects. So there are pros and cons with each one of these options. You can get both body-worn cameras combined with in-car cameras if you're willing to pay that extra money, or you can get either one or the other. Those options are wide open, and there's obviously strengths and weaknesses with each. Another issue that has come up, and it's been fairly common nationally in the discussion around police cameras, is the need for really strong policy language, and we recognize that. Although those policies are something that would need to be negotiated, generally best practice policies include recording all custodies, all traffic stops, or pedestrian stops or contacts, or transports of community members, or any other adversarial contact. If you have body-worn cameras and you have that option to record all of those. If you have in-car cameras, typically they're triggered to record anytime you turn on your overhead light bar and or your siren system. And then they can turn them on separate from those systems as well. Again, and I briefly mentioned it before, with either of these technology options, I think it's important for agencies and communities to be realistic about what they offer. And we can't view this as a holistic solution to any problem anywhere in the country. I think we just have to view it as another source of information and another option for transparency. And it certainly can be important in accountability and seeing exactly how we're delivering our services. But again, no one can view it as a holistic solution to problems. It can be a significant piece of the puzzle and perhaps another step in the right direction. Another factor that you hear nationally in the conversations around these is invasion of privacy. Obviously, not everyone wants to be recorded. Policy would include language where we inform anyone anytime we're recording. And then there's also a list of criteria where it would be inappropriate to record. and they would ask officers to recognize that criteria and turn cameras off when it's inappropriate to have them on. I didn't dive deep into that language right now. But for example, if you're investigating maybe a child abuse scenario, there could be an argument that that would be inappropriate to record. And there would be a list of criteria that would sort of be consistent with best practice. We certainly would reach out to agencies around us. And we've looked at policies from agencies like, for example, the Beaverton Police Department as one example of best practice, and talk to them a little bit about the process they took to that policy language. We recognize that if we proceed and we start the path toward policy language, it would be important to include community members in that discussion as well. So one of the other key issues is, does it make good financial sense? As I mentioned, the prices come down significantly, and one of the bids that we got from one of the top 2 or 3 vendors was for body-worn cameras for every uniformed department member. And that would essentially cost us about $1,300 a month, amortized over 5 years. And that would include all equipment and the storage of all data on a cloud-based system. So that was just one bid. We have received other bids from other vendors, but that was one to give us kind of an idea of what our options were and if it was attainable, and give us a number to balance what we would accomplish with that, and how much it would cost us, and if it makes sense. They no longer are prohibitively expensive. If we backed up 5 or 10 years, we would have evaluated them as prohibitively expensive at that time. They seem to offer a lot of features within a price range that is arguably attainable for us, depending on exactly what vendor we went with and what all features we went with. As I mentioned, that one bid that we got was specifically for body-worn cameras assigned to all sworn department members. And we were pleasantly surprised by the 5-year contract from that vendor. Some additional features that we weren't previously that familiar with. There are live mapping options with any cameras that are attached to officers or cars. As I've mentioned, that new software has become progressively more easy to edit and redact so that we're able to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests for public records. And from talking to agencies our size, they say the sheer number of requests coupled with the way that equipment has evolved has been very manageable for them, and that was encouraging. That has been a big factor also. If we backed up 5 years, we just weren't sure that we could handle the impact to staff without additional full-time employees. There are also features where this technology can record after the fact, even if it wasn't triggered to record by the officer. And exactly how far back it can go depends on which vendor you go with specifically. But that means if an officer didn't know something significant was going to happen, and then something did, and then maybe they turned their camera on late or didn't turn it on at all, and realized several hours later that that was critical video, it does still exist. And depending on what vendor and product you go with, you have some record after the fact options. Video recapture is another term depending on the vendor that you're looking at for a similar version of the same thing, where it recaptures video that you didn't specifically trigger it to record originally. The evidence managing options, that can have a big impact for agencies like us. How user-friendly is it when we need to share data, whether it's a public records request or share that information with the Clackamas County District Attorney's Office, for example? How user-friendly is it? How much time does it take? And it really has progressed well. And from talking to agencies our size, that would be manageable for us with no additional FTE. There are some additional features that we have never tested and evaluated and have only learned about recently and briefly looked at. One of those is called City Protect. It is designed to provide some additional community engagement and transparency type of service and allows for some upload public-facing features that a person can use by accessing an app on a smartphone. There are also some crime mapping features that would allow people to sort of see some daily activity by police departments. Again, those are optional features that we've never tested or evaluated. And that's a quick look at it. I realize it was quick and we didn't dive too deep into any of those particular issues. What questions or comments do folks have for us today?
And I know that the force, that this is something that they've asked for. And if I'm remembering correctly, they asked for both body-worn cameras and the car version. My question would be, what is the cost of doing both of those? And then, you know, you've given us some pretty good pros and cons of each system. I guess I'd be curious, some of those more advanced features, if those are available on both or just one or the other.
Yeah, so to answer the question, originally when it was first discussed, all the requests from community members generally use the terminology body-worn cameras, because I think that's what's just most familiar to the public, and the public may not differentiate between body-worn cameras or in-car cameras and know the difference in features and coverage. When it was brought up recently by the Milwaukie Police Employees Association, there was discussions about both body-worn cameras and in-car cameras. And then when asked clarifying follow-up questions of if there was one that they would prefer over the other or that they thought was better, they did indicate a preference for the in-car cameras because the video tends to be more clear and easier to sort of interpret and understand. Based on a little bit of research we've done, most of our attention has gone towards body-worn cameras in general, and we would have to do a little bit more research to get some more detailed numbers related specifically to in-car camera systems. If we went with in-car camera systems instead of body-worn cameras, I think it would be a little bit less expensive. And if we went with both, it would be a little bit more expensive than the numbers I submitted in the staff report or that were reflected here today.
It's far fewer cameras if we go with the cars, right? Because we've only got, what, 5, 6 units?
Well, yes and no. No, we have more cars than that. And then in addition, they mount cameras that point all the way around the car. So depending on which vendor you use and then what level of service you request, you could have 5 cameras mounted in one vehicle. But I still think the in-car cameras alone versus body-worn cameras ends up being a little bit less expensive. And maybe you have a little bit less coverage when officers are a distance away from the vehicle. But if we wanted additional research on that, we certainly could do that. And we didn't come up with a ton of research specific to the in-car cameras today. What other questions do folks have?
I have a question. So the Milwaukie Police Employees Association, the only reason that they would go with in-car is just the clarity of the video. That's it.
I believe that is the way I understood their primary reason, which definitely makes sense. The quality of the video is much better. The coverage, just you lose a little bit of coverage for a little bit better quality because it's a stable mounted camera, and you're usually, the officer isn't like right on top of the camera or the person isn't. So you're going to be usually watching video that's a little bit farther away, very stable. And if there are things happening on that, it should be more clear what's happening.
Any other questions?
It's more a comment than a question. Just I appreciate you highlighting the need for thinking of this as a tool and the importance of policy. I did not realize that these devices were basically recording all along, no matter how they were set. That really caught my attention. So I think in terms of making sure that we're both ensuring public safety is prioritized and just basic privacy and respect, those are really going to be key. I also think that we can probably address those concerns through policy. So I'm not particularly concerned, but I appreciate that you are seeing it.
I did reach out to, for example, the Beaverton Police Department Chief Groshong there, and asked kind of what their path was like to body-worn cameras. They've had them for several years. They did include their community in the process and in the evaluation of policy language. And she indicated that both the department members and the community feel it brought value. And that's one of the things we've learned from. There are a lot of studies, and there's some conflicting information in those studies. I assume all of the studies are honest information, but agencies and areas vary so much by location. And the way programming like this is going to come on board is going to be very specific to any given area or agency. So the effects and what you can expect, I think, are going to vary a lot by where they're implemented. And you see that reflected in the studies, but it does still seem that generally the studies err slightly on the side of this is probably consistently going to be a best practice expectation, and that both community members as well as police department staff feel it brings value, and they feel it provides information that can be critical.
One of the things that I really appreciated as we've been looking at this is going back to that. It's one tool. It's one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And I think we're really lucky on that front. I think that we're starting from a pretty incredible group of people who are committed to being great for our community and are interested in finding ways to be even better. So I really appreciate that perspective, and I appreciate that the chief has spoken about this as one piece, just as the union has. And I think that's what makes it more successful than it is in some places. When you try and make one thing a Band-Aid for all problems, it doesn't work. This isn't a Band-Aid. This is just a bit that we're going to focus on as we focus on all the pieces of great policing.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions. I mean, I think the price feasibility question is the only question in my mind. But I really do applaud the officers for being supportive of this. I do think the, sort of transparency value and the other things that the chief listed in his presentation, I'm happy to see this discussion move forward. So I look forward to seeing what we decide is the best option.
I agree. I look forward to moving forward with this.
All right. Well, thank you folks for your time.
Thank you. Lisa, do you still need a break?
I don't know. How long is this discussion going to be? If we've got a lot to discuss, then yes, I need a break.
Kelly, you think it's just a couple of minutes?
Oh, this is just your time. The only thing I know about is the email, Mayor, that you sent around and that Councilor Falconer seconded about the Classroom Law Project. So that's the only thing I know about. So if that's all it is, let's be real fast.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm completely forgetting what that is, so.
That's the civic education, the letter that
Oh, yeah.
I think some of us have already signed on to, but we wanted to maybe sign as a full council.
Yes, I think I'm just looking to the group to see. Just spoiler alert, seems pretty consistent with issues you care about. So if you all are interested, we could get it formatted and just put the whole council's name on it.
Yeah, everybody good with that? Okay. That was easy.
Yeah, I signed the online one already, so, but yeah.
So that was that one. I was going to see if anyone else had anything else legislatively that you wanted to touch on. I know a lot of the big questions that you all have are really more related to federal resources, and we're going to tackle that next week. at the study session in more depth, so I'm not planning to chat about that here. If you don't have anything on legislation, I was going to do one pilot comment question thing, and then we would be done.
Well, can anybody update? I haven't been keeping track of what's going on in Salem very well. So is our reach code moving? What happened on firearms? Can anybody kind of fill in any of that?
I have not been tracking the firearms bills. I've been trying to keep up with the reach code and the opt-out and HB 2021, which also includes opt-out language. They are all moving at this time. They all have wrinkles. We'll know a whole lot more after this week, I think, on all of them. There's work sessions, I think, for all three this week. I might be wrong about that. Yeah, and there's, the opposition is throwing some definite monkey wrenches at them, but it's moving. It's continuing. They're all three moving.
Who's the opposition?
The Home Builders Association, Northwest Natural is trying to pretend that they're not the opposition while being the opposition.
To both reach and the other, or just to reach?
To both, actually, in different ways. Yeah, home builders not so much on the opt-out. That's more Northwest Natural, and then the complexities that are arising. Anything else? Anybody else? So Kelly, pilot.
Okay. We had heard and had been delinquent that you all would like to have kind of a more forward-looking schedule that you could see. So you should have gotten that from Jordan. So take a look. You are going to want to swap. So we said if you want to swap, let us know, but I think you probably will want to swap. You've got vacations you probably know about. You have events or significant times of year that you're going to want to weigh in on, probably personally. So please do take a look at that. We do have a need, and I think Councilor Falconer, you were asked if you could potentially do the May article. So I just want to see if you are okay with that. If you're not,
Oh, I thought I answered.
responded.
Did I not hit
Yeah,
send?
she did.
It's entirely possible. I thought
I've been in meetings all day, so
No worries.
it's totally on me. I apologize. So that was it. As long as you're good, that schedule is for you all to review, and just let us know, and we'll try to hold any swaps to outside the 2-month window, so that you all have plenty of time to work on it. So that was it.
All right, cool. Well, good job, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.
Did we make a motion to adjourn?
Oh, we sure did.
You should.
I'll move to
And I can't.
adjourn.
We didn't
Oh
do
my
any
gosh.
motions all night long. We accomplished nothing that staff wanted us to do.
Scott was very quick to shake his head.
I moved.
So I heard a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Did I hear a second? Okay. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Good night.
Good night.